Hey guys, welcome everyone to Disobey. I'm Albert Zsigovits. I'm coming from Hungary, and this is my first time at Disobey, or rather in Helsinki. And I have to say, damn, it's cold here. So yeah, I've been having a runny nose all the day, so bear with me, please. This talk is about a malware that made some waves not so long ago, back in last year in August. And I just want to give you guys a short primer to it. This will be a technical synopsis with some technical details. I hope you'll enjoy this. So a little bit about myself. I'm coming from what I like to call it a traditional blue team background. I started out as a security analyst, went on to senior incident responder, then I joined an AV company. And over the time, I've spent learning all these things. I sort of developed a keen interest in memory forensics, threat intelligence, reverse engineering, and malware analysis. So that's where I'm coming from. I've been doing mostly reverse engineering the past year, and I made 2 reports during that year, one for an information stealer malware, and now for DarkRAT version 2, which is basically a rat. I think this is my 3rd presentation overall, so I just started presenting last year, and yeah, I'll try to keep going. So let's talk about the origins and the source of the malware. Basically, when I first encountered this malware, I tried to sort of ascertain where it's coming from. And what I gathered is it's mostly some joint work from previous malwares. For example, it was the absent loader and the light HTTP. These were sort of the inspiration for this malware. And those previous malwares were both made public on GitHub, so you can look it up and learn a bit about themselves. Those 2 malwares basically made for educational purposes, and I think the developer of this malware took a lot of inspiration from those 2 malwares. Oh yeah, you gotta love these disclaimers. It seems like every rat developer putting up some sort of disclaimer now. They try to avoid some sort of responsibility by saying, this software is not to be used maliciously, for example. While on the other side, its whole purpose is to be used maliciously, so it's kind of interesting. And basically, just one question remains: if it's all legal, then why is it only advertised on underground cybercrime forums? Yeah, I guess the developer doesn't even know that answer. The leak. There's a big, huge collection of malware source code on GitHub now under the account TLGIT. I think he houses a really big collection of leaked malware source code, and DarkRAT was also amongst those codes. And the developer of this malware went to the trouble of opening several pull requests and issues on this repo, saying, hey, you're not permitted to share my malicious code, which is kind of weird. And he also says, this isn't open source. And I'm like, what? Why? This is malicious code. And he again goes to the trouble saying, this code is vulnerable and it's for educational purposes, which is kind of dodgy. Then the maintainer of the account, replies in fashion saying, hey, I doubt you went to your local government to register your illegal activities. So yeah, which is a fair point. But he keeps bargaining, leaving his account. So he says, please try to add me here, and let's talk about this. So he's trying to get the contents or the malware's source code to be removed. But I guess the maintainer won't remove it. So one of the sources for this malware was the light HTTP malware, which is HTTP botnet. And once I started digging further down into the origins and the comings of this malware, it became clear that the guy took a lot of inspiration from these previous works. And basically, as you can see, that's how the first version of the DarkRAT came to be. The guy just basically went and changed some parameters, renamed some classes, functions, and that's how the first version came to be, which is, honestly, is a bit lame. But I like these comparisons for two reasons. One of them is it just goes to show that how easy it has become to develop a simple malware, for example, in C++ or C#. You don't really need to know code that much. You can just basically take code from already existing repos. Secondly, this kind of shows that these actors, perpetrators, or you can call them scriptides, don't really know about operational security, and this just shows that GitHub never forgets, so you can find all sort of information on early pull requests. But who is this guy? He goes by the name Dark Spider, and he had multiple accounts on many social platforms like GitHub, Pastebeam. But all of these separate accounts could be tied up into one single identity because his OPSEC was so bad. On the GitHub account, he states that he's a web developer and a security researcher as well, which kind of brings me to the point. I'm not sure if you saw The Matrix, but there's this specific scene with Agent Smith and Mr. Anderson being apprehended, and Agent Smith just goes like, hey, Mr. Anderson. It seems you're living two lives now. In one of them, you're a programmer for a respectable software company, as the guy claims to be on the right side on the slide. On the other hand, at night, for example, he's most likely a hacker, or who knows? Probably he's a vigilante at night, and in real life, he's Bruce Wayne living as a playboy. So the product or the malware was mostly advertised on hack forums and some other small-timer underground forums. And this guy would often, bolster up the fact that he's doing quality coding. He would often post screenshots of his machine or the development environment he was coding in. And again, this just shows some amateurish level of malware coding. And as you can see on the slide, he would post some screenshots of his desktop. And obviously, when this opportunity comes, you can spot some really interesting things, like he's using some German language, like Codegenerierung ist abgeschlossen. Obviously, it's coming from a German keyboard or layout, so we can kind of put a picture together that is some of German origins. Maybe he's residing in Germany, Switzerland, or Austria, who knows. These are some of the functionalities that the malware had. I think you guys can already sense there's some really script kiddish, amateurish level behind this. But there's been some interesting functionalities along the way. And these are some of the interesting functions. I'd like to detail one of them, which was kind of interesting for me. It was hiding the C2 server address. This guy implemented a rather interesting process where he would have a pastebin URL, a encryption key, which turned out to be a RC4 encryption key, both in the sample. And the sample would go out to this pastebin URL, grab the contents, which was, as you can see on the screenshot, a base 64 encoded string. The sampler would decode that, and it would give out a binary blob. Now, that blob would be decrypted with the RC4 key, and then you would have the C2 server address. So it's kind of a, I would say, a small timer obfuscation, but I think it had some real creativity, which was interesting for me. One of the many features was having some sort of anti-debugging capabilities. I would say these are really simple checks for checking whether you're in a debugging environment. And all of this could be could be avoided or circumvented on the fly by just patching a few bytes. He even went to the length to use some interesting instructions like the RTTSC instruction, where the sampler would count the elapsed ticks, for example, and but these checks again could be circumvented by simply just replacing a few bytes in a debugger. The malware also had some functionality to detect any sort of AVs on the machine. It was using a built-in function or feature, the WMI command set, specifically the WQAL. And this feature felt like a little bit incomplete, because the sampler would just report back the status, grab the name of the AV present on the machine, and send it back to the C2 server. So I think it was kind of incomplete, and the developer meant to further develop this part of the code. The sampler would also have a capability to self-deletion, which I'm sure you guys see it. It was really amateurish, popping a CMD shell and basically just forcing a quiet deletion of the file from the disk. It also had an interesting technique that it was using. It's called a process hollowing, where basically any malware now can sort of unmap or hollow out a memory from a process, and basically just overwrite or switch out that legitimate memory of the process with certain malicious code. These are some of the API calls that you would use to achieve this. Now, this developer would go and also sell his source version of the malware, which means basically he would grant access to the source code and also supply customers with the builder itself. Builders come into picture when you're trying to deploy at mass. For example, you want to sell the product or the malware to more and more customers, and basically you want to switch out, for example, the mutexes, the user agents, or the spread tags, the pastebin URLs in this case. And it's fairly easy to use these builders. After the builders are sold, basically I noticed that this guy would start developing certain plugins for the C2 panels. For example, the guy would have plugins, for example, a DDoS module, Monero miner, or even a stealer that would steal certain credentials from your browsers. This is how the panel looks like. Got a lot of these colors. And these are the tasks that you could run or execute from the C2 panel. Basically, you had the capability to update the malware, uninstall it, kill the persistence of it, or even to deploy the Monero miner, launch the DDoS module as well. Now, once you face a C2 panel, as a researcher or a malware analyst, or a threat intel guy, first you would do some sort of enumeration on the C2 server, see what kind of resources are available. And in this specific case, it was quite interesting that you would find a resource under .git/config, which obviously is a big no-no. This again proves that the guy doesn't even know about operational security that much. And as you can see on the screenshot, the whole panel, or the source of the panel, was hosted under this URL. So basically, you could just clone it and get all the files that would go with the C2 panel. Or, for that matter, you can go ahead and call /index that would list all the files. And basically, you could just parse the name parameter from the files and put together all the lists, all the files that were present on the C2 server. Now, it turns out this panel also had a specific vulnerability in it. But first, I have to start with a disclaimer. If you start to play around panels, you have to be very careful, because in certain countries, this is not allowed. And obviously, I just grabbed the copy of the panel and played around this on a local VM. So again, this was a local proof of concept. So the main question is, and you might be wondering, how would you get access into these panels? Obviously, they would come with some sort of username or password login, and there's a way to circumvent that. On the right side, you can see a screenshot that shows once a machine is infected, this is the kind of C2 traffic that would be sent to this server. It would contain this request parameter, and as you can see, this is a base64 encoded blob. Now, upon decoding this sort of base64 blob, you would get these parameters. As you can see, it collects, for example, the computer name, GPU name, CPU name from the machine. And as I started playing around this, and you can spot on the screenshot, you can just basically insert a script tag to the computer name resource. And I'm sure if you're into pen testing and know about XSS, this is the first thing that you would try on a site. And as you can see on the right side, it was successfully sent in. So basically, once you recode these parameters and send in the request to the C2 server, upon the next time the administrator is logging into the panel, this window would open up with the text 1. So that means the XSS was successful. There's certainly a window of opportunity here, and we could further exploit this by exchanging that script tag with something more advanced. So let's say we can switch it with an iframe that's pointing to an external resource. Now, in that external resource, you can put any code, basically. But in this case, I generated a CSRF birth payload that would create a new user on the C2 panel. So once this gets encoded again with base64 and it gets sent to the C2 server, the next time the administrator is logging into the panel, he doesn't even know there's a new user created. So that's one way to sort of achieve this. Now, I'm coming to the point where I think we need to discuss about something. It's about IOCs and TTPs, because I'm sort of starting to realize a common theme here. There's this vicious circle. It starts by a bad guy or a perpetrator writing code, then releasing it. Then the researchers come into play and analyze the malware. They sort of release IOCs, TTPs around it because it's new stuff and everybody needs to know about these. So I'm not sure if you know, but obviously perpetrators and malware writers also read these blogs and IOCs, TTPs, and they sort of react to it in a way. This sometimes creates challenges because your advantages are now gone, and the bad guys are often, realigning their techniques, migrating from infrastructures, and this creates a real problem sometimes. Now, on the 5th of November, basically I released some sort of gist and IOCs to GitHub and Twitter as well. And the developer of the malware sort of approached me on my social account, which you could say is a bit dodgy again, because I'm maybe not OPSEC aware. On the 8th of November, again, after a couple of days, this guy also announced that he would retire, and he left a goodbye message on one of the Discord servers that he was using. I just wanted to briefly touch on a topic that's, I think, really important in the community. Once I released these IOCs and TTPs, I got a lot of positive feedback from a couple of the guys from the researcher community. And I would like to also inspire you and advocate this sort of behavior, because I think this field is about sharing knowledge. The more you know, the better detections you can write, basically, or even react to sort of breaches or pen tests. And I feel like we should keep on doing this. We should keep releasing IOCs, TTPs. And I really liked how others complemented my work, added some additional comments to it, other IOCs. I wanted to finish off by stating a couple of ending thoughts. One of them is, as you could saw in the slides, these perpetrators are really not OPSEC aware. They don't have any sort of cyber hygiene. And in some of the cases, we were able to bust these actors. We found holes, issues with C2 panels, and exploiting these in a way and learning more about these issues, we could really find these guys, pass the information off to law enforcement, for example. But what will happen when these guys learn more about operational security? I feel like eventually we need to find other ways to bust some of these perps. Keep IOCs, TTPs to an inner circle. That's a question. I feel like once you release IOCs and TTPs, the advantage you have will certainly disappear over time. These guys overreact, change tactics, migrate from infrastructures to different infrastructure. And sometimes, there's a real opportunity when these guys overreact or react, because that's the time when they also make some mistakes, and you can find some, again, some issues, holes in their infrastructure. But there's a real question here whether you should release it publicly, hold it to your inner circles, perhaps, or even not share anything at all. Engaging, talking to perpetrators, I would say that's definitely a big no-no. Don't leave a surface for them. And I kind of felt like I was in the crosshairs when he approached me. Some would say, they would be flattened by a malware developer if they were to approach him. But in my case, I felt like I may have missed something on the operational security side, because once he approached me, I felt like I was a target. Also, you should check your local laws, whether it's allowed to hack into C2 panels. I know for a fact, for example, in the US, it's considered hacking back under the CFAA law. So you should really not attack these sort of C2 panels if your government doesn't allow it. And finally, I feel like the InfoSec community is one of the best communities out there. And I would urge everyone to share information, spread knowledge, let everybody know if you have something or you've worked on, because I feel like everyone can just chip in and complement the other's work. And I feel like that goes a long way. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the Disobey organizers. It's been an honor to present here. Don't forget, it's Valentine's Day. Kiss your loved ones. And thank you, guys.